This is the notes video for your vocabulary list 4. In this list, we're working through the prefixes ob and ante or ante, which means in front of, against, toward, or before. If you are a Spanish speaker or if you are learning Spanish, the word ante or antes de means before. So we have some connections there. These are called cognates. So if you speak Spanish or you're learning Spanish, remember that ante or ante, ante, means in front of or before. And then we have the prefixes post and retro. These mean behind or after. Some word families that come up in our vocab words are seed, which means to go or to yield, struct, which is a structure or build, act, obviously means action or acting or performing something, an activity, hume, which means ground or earth, scrib, which means writing or text, and then our suffixes, and I want to highlight this time with this list and moving forward that our suffixes tell us or indicate for us which form or which part of speech a word is. So when we're looking at our different forms of the word, it's the suffix that changes, and that changes the part of speech. So whether it's a noun or an adjective or a verb, things along those lines. So we have eor, I-O-R, which at the end of the word would make a comparison. We have us, O-U-S, which is the condition of. We have ive, I-V-E, which is also in the condition of. It's not perfect, but us more often is going to be theoretical, while ive is usually going to be something that you would notice with one of your 5 senses, or it's tangible. And then we have e or ity, the y or the ity, coming at the end of the word means quality or the state of. And then our new words this time are antecedent, anterior, obstruction, obscure, obsolete, retroactive, retrospect, posterity, posthumous, and postscript. So we're going to practice making sense out of these words, or a couple of these words, using our word families, starting with the word antecedent. So we have ante, which means before. Let me move this out of the way. Ante means before. Seed means to go. And dent or ent means the result of. So whatever definition of antecedent is going to have something to do with before, go, and the result of. When I think result of, I think cause. So I wonder if we're going to have a definition that has some sort of connection to cause and effect. The next word I want to go over with you is retro, which means behind, act, and tiv, or iv, which is in the condition of. So for the word retroactive, we're going to have something along the lines of behind, an action, and the condition. And then finally, the last word we're going to go over, or we're going to predict together, is post, which means after. Whom, which means ground or earth. Interestingly enough, hume is going to connect to the word human or humanity. And we'll talk about that when we get to posthumous. And then the must part or the us part is, again, in the condition of. So starting right off the bat with antecedent, we took those word parts apart. we came up with before, to go, the result of. And remember that the suffix over here, the ent, is what changes the part of speech. So when I say it goes before, or it goes before the result, the it is coming from our suffix, because our suffix makes it a noun. Okay, so let's see what our actual definition is. The cause of something or an event that comes before. It goes before results. Literally, antecedent is the cause, which means it's coming before the result. So it's the thing that precedes or causes whatever the outcome is. Like the antecedent to my parents grounding me was my failing grades. I'm going to pause so you can write the rest of these down. But we have anterior, position near the front, or it's an adjective meaning ahead of or in front of. I usually leave my shoes in the anterior by the door, so I always know where they are. It's the opposite of posterior, or posterior. Posterior is going to be another form of a word we have coming up. Then we have obstruction. Obstruction, it looks like my sounds like for obstruction is a completely different word. But obstruction, it's a noun that means something in the way. It's an obstacle. It's usually in the way of view, or a path of some sort. The view from the hotel was free from obstruction and had a nice view of the beach. Other forms are obstruct and obstructed. Then we have obscure. Obscure is unclear, hidden, or distorted. It's rare. The dark clouds obscure the sun. So obscure is also going to really connect to something that is in the way of your sight, in the way of seeing something clearly. Kind of like obstruction, but obscure is more visual specifically. Then we have obsolete. Obsolete. It's an adjective that means outdated. It's from the past and out of use. Now that smartphones are popular, landlines are almost obsolete. A landline is like the telephone I have in my classroom. Coming back to the words that we predicted before, we have retroactive. And we said that the word parts make it seem like it's going to mean something that's acting or after or in the condition. So I said, in the state of performing after. In the state of performing after. Now, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but let's see how it connects to the actual definition. So we said, in the state of performing after. And our actual definition is that it's an adjective, and it means beginning from a date in the past and catching up. Beginning from a date in the past and catching up. When Brian's raise was approved in February, he was paid the retroactive rate from January 2. Another form is retroactively. It's an adverb, which means it's how something happens. So what's really important to remember about retroactive, it's like you had a deadline for something, but it wasn't decided on in time, or it wasn't, the rule wasn't made in time. So when they make the decision and it's too late, they have to catch up and kind of go back to when it was due and work to catch up from there. So if Brian got a raise, but his raise wasn't approved until February, but it was approved from January 1st going forward, he would get that payment late. He would still get it retroactively. They would catch up, so he gets what he deserves. Retrospect. It looks like I also have the wrong word pronunciation here, because that says posterior. But retrospect is what that should say. Retrospect is a noun. It means a review or consideration of something past. We also call this hindsight. So we might say in hindsight, we might say, in retrospect, I probably should not have made that promise since it's a hard one to keep. So in this case, retrospect is suggesting that we regret something, or we reflect and realize that maybe we would do something differently in this sentence. Then we have posterity. Posterity is a noun. It means long term, lasting generations. Like for posterity, I like to journal about the things that happen in my life. Another form of posterity is posterior. Posterior actually doesn't mean long lasting in the same way. It's going to be the opposite of anterior, which we said is at the front. So posterior means at the back. Then we have posthumous, or posthumously is another form. It comes from post, which means after, hum, which means ground, and us, which means in the condition of. So I kind of crafted this definition that says in the condition of after the ground. Now that doesn't make any sense, because what the heck does after the ground mean? Well, this is where we connect to being human or having humanity. So posthumous means occurring or achieved after one has died. And so instead of after the ground, after one has died is implying after someone has been buried or had a funeral. And this comes from just the tradition of burying human bodies. Now that we are in a time where more people are having their remains cremated, that kind of goes to this idea that people return to dust when they're cremated, or when their bodies decompose, they return to dirt, they return to the ground. So humanity is connected to earth, connected to the ground. Posthumously is connected to a burial that happens after a death. So kind of an interesting origin there. In a sentence, Vincent van Gogh, famous artist, lived a simple life, but his art became famous posthumously. Famous posthumously. So he became famous, and his art made a lot of money after he had died. And then finally, postscript. Postscript is the PS in a letter. That's almost the only time we use postscript. But it's an added note, usually at the end of a letter. It could be at the end of some instructions, or I put them at the end of my test sometimes. But it's the PS of a letter. And that, my friends, are your notes.